Welcome to Episode 3 of the Focus on FinEd, the Policy Convenings series, where we explore where the fields of financial education and financial well-being are headed, based on Policy Convenings, the National Endowment for Financial Education, in partnership with the Council for Economic Education, held with advocates and stakeholders around the country. I'm Dr. Billy Hensley, President and CEO of NEFE. Today we are moving on to our second convenings topic, which focuses on how states can support financial education efforts outside of requiring mandated classes in K-12 schools. The financial education community is full of differing opinions, but one that is nearing consensus is that properly considered, well-informed state education mandates are an effective and clear way of reaching students. Yet, there are many challenges with mandating financial education. For instance, additional curriculum requirements may further burden teachers who are navigating regular policy churn, and statewide mandates might be unrealistic for many states in the U.S. where the education systems are driven by local control. Another challenge is assessing the effectiveness of learning interventions, ensuring not only gains in knowledge but also behavior change. Since implementing financial education mandates comes with many challenges, we wanted to discuss alternative statewide approaches. We gathered K-12 educators, state agency leaders, and financial education advocates together to share known alternatives and brainstorm new strategies. Discussions included strategies, metrics, and the ramifications of students not having access to some form of financial education. To help us dig into this is NEFE's Director of Policy and Advocacy, Raven Newberry. She is joined by Heather Daly of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and Mike Bobbitt, the Deputy Commissioner of the New York City Department of Youth and Community Development, to discuss next steps in this area. Take it away, Raven.
Thank you, Billy. We were lucky enough to have Heather serve as the MC for the policy convening on this particular topic, and we're thrilled to have her and Mike joining us to continue this conversation. So welcome, Heather and Mike. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Nice to be here.
Before we start, Heather, we do want to state that you are here today representing yourself and not the Federal Reserve, correct?
That's right. So I am the Director of Economic Education at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, but any sort of thoughts, opinions that I share today are my own, not necessarily those of the New York Fed or the Federal Reserve System.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. With that said, let's go ahead and jump in with our questions. Heather, as I mentioned, you were the MC for the convening on this topic. So I'd like to start just by asking what your takeaways were from that event.
Yeah, so we had this great event, virtual event, really talking to a lot of different people about state financial education mandates, and in addition to those, different alternative ways to pursue financial education, because state financial education mandates are an effective and clear way of reaching students. And for anyone who isn't aware, a state mandate really means legislating financial education requirements in sort of a state's classroom education standards or guidelines. So trying to influence really what's taught in the classroom in terms of the subject matter. And those are a great way to pursue financial education. However, they're hard to create. They can face a lot of different barriers. There could be a lack of consensus or turnover among different state leaders. And there could be state legislative or constitutional roadblocks. So while they're a great approach, they can be hard. They can be hard to do. So even when they are established also, right? So they could be hard to do, but then even when they're established, these mandates can also be subject to the forces of local control of schools, right? In a lot of states, what schools teach is not necessarily uniform across the state. The local community has a lot of say and influence in what's taught and how it's taught. And so that concept of local control can mean that mandates are implemented differently, unevenly, or not at all, right, across different communities. So then you may not have sort of the desired outcomes or changes in financial behavior that you're looking for. So the overall feeling from the convening was that we want to support mandates where they can be implemented. However, in the discussion groups, we heard about the importance of leveraging multiple types of local community institutions, libraries, hospitals, civic organizations, community organizations, to help support initiatives linked to financial education outside of schools.
Perfect. That was such an excellent overview of the event. Thank you so much. And Heather, you actually recommended Mike to join us on this podcast because of his work in the community, leveraging partnerships to do financial education initiatives. So, Mike, your work involves efforts to raise financial literacy across low-income groups and neighborhoods in New York City, again, by leveraging those community-based organizations. So I'm just thinking for our listeners who are considering alternatives to state-level mandates, would you share more about some of these initiatives and how they were developed?
Sure. Thank you, Raven, and thank you, Heather, for the invitation to join this particular conversation. So for those who are not familiar, New York City's Department of Youth and Community Development has a mission that seeks to alleviate conditions of poverty. And in our vision statement, which I'm going to touch on, we talk about having New Yorkers thrive and flourish. So we work through community-based organizations. We're a contracting agency using a combination of city tax levy or state or federal funding. And through various procurements, we engage nonprofits throughout New York City to provide direct human services. If you imagine the breadth of needs that New Yorkers may have, particularly households with low income, you'll imagine it touches on a wide array of life domains. So we have a number of youth services programs. We're very well known for that, and we do a lot of after-school programs. Probably have the largest summer youth employment program in the country, over 70,000 youth put to work each summer. We also have an array of programs focused on literacy and on immigrant services. And we do a bunch of other stuff too. We have a fatherhood initiative. We do work from adolescents to seniors in terms of the poverty alleviation portfolio under me, but I think some of the programmatic areas that would be relevant to this conversation would be some of those that I talked about. We have some programs that target adolescent literacy programs that target adolescents, try to help keep them in school and keep them engaged through project learning, homework help, and other complements to the school day. We have a number of high school programs. And again, context here, I mentioned after school. As an agency, we have a significant number of programs under what we call Compass. There's a comprehensive after-school services program. So the number of grade school and middle school programs, our whole middle school portfolio is called Sonic, which is Schools Out NYC. And we do have some programs at 9 through 12, some programs that look at kids at risk of being disconnected and try to keep that connection strong. And so I mentioned this program as one of the things that we funded where there was a clear connection to Heather and her colleagues and the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. Heather can say a little bit more about this too, how, we struck upon working together specifically. But those programs, nonprofits are looking to engage high school age students in the interest of helping them graduate with their diploma rather than HSE or GED program and consider next steps, whether it's career, vocational work, or going on to college. And so that was a program, given its design and opportunities to collaborate and sort of strengthen and bolster the design, where it made a lot of sense to work with the Fed. But, while I have the mic, I do want to say there's other programs since that inception, where we sort of piloted that work, like our seniors programs or our healthy families programs, which are very wide-ranging social services programs. Individuals come in for seniors. Maybe there's an issue around isolation or adult caregiving. For healthy families, there could be housing issues, employment issues, child care or elder care, really any of the myriad of possible needs. And those programs do some hand-holding to help people find either government benefits or local resources that can assist, stabilize, and strengthen that family. The need to pivot toward partners that can focus on financial literacy, if that's not native to the nonprofit's design, is paramount, is very important. How can we talk about poverty if we're not also at some level talking about financial literacy?
Heather, do you have anything to add about that partnership? I just wanted to give you a moment.
Sure. We've been so fortunate to work together with Mike and New York City Department of Youth and Community Development. What I think is so valuable about our opportunity to speak to students or youth who are working through the different Department of Youth and Community Development programs is that matter of timing. I think one of the keys to financial education is I mean, many people think, not just me, right? One of the keys to financial education is sharing that information at the moment that it's so valuable, because that can be one of the struggles with school-based initiatives, right? Is if you're out of school and you just never got to that point in the financial education curriculum, or if you're out of school and it's just been a long time, right? I mean, how many of us, I don't want to speak for anyone here, but how many of us remember all of our high school geometry, right? And when I'm trying to measure something, sometimes I really remember that it'd be nice if I knew a little bit more. But the point is, when a kid is earning their first paycheck, or when a student is thinking about college and how to finance it, those are the moments, finding those times when people are most receptive and they're going to put that information into practice really quickly. That's what's been so exciting for us. So we've done workshops with students thinking about going to college, about college financing, right? And sort of how to weigh different options, what data to look at, things like that. We've worked with Mike and his team to talk to students who are in internship programs and maybe getting their first paycheck. And so we talk about building healthy credit or budgeting. Those are the moments. And then, I don't know, Mike, you might get there too, but the things like how you communicate that information, whether you go to peers and leverage people's peers' connections and community institutions, say like a barbershop, Mike, to share that information and give it that additional credibility. That's something you can't always get through a school. Schools are such strong community institutions. I don't want to make it sound like that's not legitimate, but the classroom piece, right? We all know. I mean, I can tell my 13-year-old what I think is cool, and it's not going to stick. Right? I try to keep telling him financial education is cool, but unless
you're thinking it's cool does not mean that he's thinking it's cool.
Right.
He's just learning that you think that it's cool. And I have a 13-year-old as well, so I have some experiential knowledge on that front. So let me interject on two fronts. You mentioned the barbershop, and I'm glad that you jogged my memory about that, because I wanted to get to that, but I hadn't thought to get to it yet. But I wanted to say one other thing before that, when you were talking about internships. And I was speaking a moment ago about an array of program models that we do have, but I was neglectful because I wanted to mention a couple of others I just didn't get to. So among our neighborhood-focused programs, I touched briefly on the ones that try to retain high school students, encourage them, and graduate with their degrees. Diplomas. But we do also have a number of programs. We call them Opportunity Youth. And they are adolescents ages 16 to 24 who are not presently in school or working at the time they enroll in the program. And so it's been very important to try to model experientially and give practical exposure for young people who may have an interest in the world of work, but so far the world of work hasn't been very sticky for them. And so those programs, I mean, I know we've been working with Heather and her team in the Fed around the high school programs, but we have worked in just as robust a fashion with these Opportunity Youth. And you talked, Heather, about not just the timing, but the method of the messaging. And so what I love about that is for these Opportunity Youth, I mentioned earlier that our agency works with various funding sources. So these programs have been supported by a federal funding stream, which is Community Services Block Grant funding. So if you dust off your history book a little over 50 years ago, when Lyndon Baines Johnson launched the war on poverty and created this idea that across the country there'd be about 1,000 community action agencies that listen to communities of color, communities in need, and empower and do what we continue to call engage with the maximum feasible participation of the poor, or we wouldn't use the term the poor now, but, households with low income. So the design and the advocacy around those programs is to engage the communities that are being served as to what's the most targeted way to enhance your well-being and increase your self-sufficiency. That's the design of the program. That's the background of the program. That says a lot about the current operations of the program. So I said we work through nonprofits, but also the manner in which we work through nonprofits. So when we were able to leverage this relationship and begin working with the Fed, having opportunity youth who, again, have potential careers right in front of them. It just hasn't been crystallized or mapped out in the design of those programs, where they will get supportive employment and paid wages part-time, as well as job coaching sessions. And then to take cohorts of those young people and actually bring them to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and say, you're here because our nation has recognized your potential as young people who just happen to reside in a household with low income. But we want to talk to you about how you invest in your future. And you've been underexposed to a lot of really helpful information. And so to do a handoff like that, where, there's the combination of thinking about college, as Heather said, thinking about how you budget, as I think Heather was also implying. And then also, one of the benefits of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York is you do have the gold vault there. So to have young people become exposed to ideas of wealth, as well as how that pertains to them, and think about their trajectory kind of in real time, I think has been very, very powerful. And it fits very much in line with our agency and many of our portfolios work, their vision. There are assets like the Fed all over New York City, and New Yorkers need to recognize them or be made aware of them where they can be made aware of them, and recognize they belong to them as New Yorkers. I've had parallel experiences outside of financial literacy with some of our other programmatic work. One example, and this will get me back to the barbershop that Heather mentioned. In our fatherhood initiative, we've supported a Father's Day event for many years. And we always do it the day before Father's Day so that fathers can do whatever they want to do on their own on Father's Day. But they're encouraged to come to this event, and they're encouraged, if they have younger children, to strap on the diaper pack themselves and navigate getting around the city to whatever cultural institution we may have selected that year. And I think that that's part of the joy, whether it's been the Transit Museum or one of the many zoos or, aquarium or, different sorts of facilities, things right under the noses of New Yorkers, but they may not have taken note of them or paid attention to how they are relevant. So because we had some recent history seeing the importance of those relationships, the Fed really fit right in, is exposing people to not just the power of money, but helping them think. It helps shepherd them through some introductory conversations about what is their relationship to money and to wealth. So, I credit you, Heather, and your team for doing that. And then finally, you did talk about the barbershop talk. So I think that we have observed the timing and the nature of trying to communicate to audiences, particularly New Yorkers with needs, sometimes calls for novel ideas. And so certainly in all quarters, we've been affected by the global coronavirus pandemic. One of our agency's responses during the pandemic, when we began teleworking, which we were very unused to, government agencies delivering services, nonprofits delivering services in that way. And if we think back to the summer of 2020, where not only were we contending with all of that, but there were the protests nationally around the George Floyd murder. And we were quarantining, and cities like New York at one point are actually curfewing too. And so we took a look at some of our constituents' needs and thought we should try to deliver helpful information and stage organic communications in real time during this period where there's social unrest and there's confusion and all the rest of it. And so that was the beginning of, I'm going to use our acronym now. So Department of Youth and Community Development is DYCD. So the DYCD Barbershop Talks, where we sort of recreated some of the conversations. If any of you or your listeners have stopped into a beauty salon or a barbershop, you've probably been visited, or a party to some very interesting, organically flowing conversations. So we sort of borrowed that mindset, where maybe now it's safe to go to barbershop, but at that time, people probably, like me, my daughter learned how to cut hair during the pandemic when we were in a virtual barbershop. And the topics that were clearly relevant, particularly we were seeking as our target audience to reach BIPOC community and men with low household income, to talk about health, to talk about mental health, to talk about well-being, personal transformation, and to talk about financial literacy. Key topics. And I was very pleased that Heather was able to be available and to connect the bank with that conversation, to build on the relationship we already have. And one thing I'll say, and then I'll kind of give the mic back up, I've noticed financial literacy is one of those topics that now that we've struck upon in the forum, you can't even do it in one session. We started with modest ambitions just to have 2 sessions. One was examining debt, and the other one is to begin thinking about building wealth. And they were very well received from all that I gather, and I know that we will continue as part of the barbershop to return to that topic. What does it mean to build wealth? There's so many things that we could be discussing, and we didn't really scratch the surface of understanding how money works in that conversation. So that might actually be a lens for a possible 3rd or a 4th installment along those lines.
Yeah, and I have to give a shout out to my colleague, Devon Bodie, for that. It was not only a panel that we really wanted to be on, we just so enjoyed it. And I think what's so great too about what DYC does and what that particular sort of format also did is getting to people where they are, and not feeling like, oh, if we're going to have a panel or we're going to have a lecture or something about financial literacy, it's a serious topic, but we don't have to sit and think about, the most serious way to present it, right? We're just sort of riffing off each other and trying to have a conversation and, sometimes tangling back and forth about the right way to do things. But that's how people figure things out in real life. And I just think that's such a good model. It's just such a good point. And especially now, right? When everything can be really serious, it's sort of finding a way to have those conversations in a way that feels really accessible and natural. I just think that's something that the groups you work with, Mike, and the folks that in your agency that we've worked with are just so good at.
I love the idea of replicating that in-person organic community virtually. And I think you all did a great job. And just for our listeners, anyone can see the recording of this. It's on YouTube, correct?
Yes, thank you. Just look for NYC Youth at YouTube. We have archived the conversations, and I encourage your listeners to spread the word widely. As I mentioned a moment ago, our target audience is New Yorkers. But I have noticed the service audience is larger, and we welcome that. Men and women alike from around the country. If these discussions are relevant to you, they pertain to you, we invite you to listen to the archive ones. We have a barbershop at least once a month. So there's one, Tuesday, January 25th on mentoring is the next one. I know we're already planning for February, and I've seen how circumstances have presented themselves, we've had 2-3 discussions a month sometimes, and it keeps the staff busy. But they're really thrilled to do it because, kind of aligned with what Heather was saying a moment ago, the immediacy. As government administrators, it's our job to oversee proper delivery of human services that the nonprofits are doing, and they're doing that in real time. So we don't as often get to work directly on delivering services. So, during this time of acute need, it's been very gratifying to try to lift up some conversations. I think the combination of live streaming and archiving them at YouTube continues to make those resources available. So, I have every indication we're going to keep going. No one has told us we shouldn't. And unfortunately, we've been dealing with the pandemic longer than some folks might have thought we would be. So I think there's every need to continue to try to connect folks, both on topics acutely related to financial literacy and across a number of other life domains about our individual, well-being, much to discuss.
Yes. I was just hearing about these initiatives, I think really speaks to the strength of your partnership between your two organizations. And a question for either or both of you, how do you find the right partner? What does that look like? Can you talk us through that process? What are things you look for? How do you build a strong partnership with other organizations?
I'm happy to weigh in on this. One thing that I can say for myself personally, I don't remember exactly how I first learned that this is part of the Fed's mandate to do this, but once it caught my attention, I was struck by the alignment between the Dodd-Frank Act and our agency's mission. And so I recognized in reviewing the act that if it's the Fed's mission to ensure that communities in need receive financial education, and it's our funded mission to support and strengthen and increase the self-efficacy and the stability of low-income communities, then we have to find a way to work together. We just have to figure out exactly what that was. But, that motivated me strongly to begin dialogue with some of Heather's colleagues, where, at some points I said, well, these are different portfolios and this is how we generally work. What's of interest to you, whether it be demographic, geographic neighborhoods that we serve for neighborhood focused work, or demographically certain portfolios. I mentioned we serve in the poverty alleviation, everything from adults to seniors. So let's talk, So the way that we work, we fund nonprofits to do social services. And so with our strength being in social services, part of what complements that was health and well-being. Those are not the contracts that we fund, but we have sister agencies like the city's Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, or the public hospitals, Health and Hospitals Corporation. It makes sense for us to be intentional about steering our nonprofits to some of their campaigns and initiatives. And likewise, making sure in the health interventions that they're doing, people will have social services needs that will present when they come into a hospital or a clinic, right? Even simple things like, even at the scale we operate, maybe about 70,000 youth getting a summer job, they all must take a physical, which means we have, about 130,000 young people taking a physical. That's a great moment to have young people thinking about, they're not necessarily invulnerable. There's a great opportunity for them to think about refashioning their relationship to their well-being outside of going to the emergency room. And so we recognize that maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, we looked at the various pilot programs we had across different divisions of the agency and sort of collectivized all of that, whereby now we have a universal application. So we're funding like hundreds and hundreds of nonprofits to serve like hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers. But with this common application, upon enrollment, the family is asked, do you have health insurance? And if you don't have health insurance, would you like someone to contact you about that? And then we share that information with our partners. We're not in the job of enrolling people, but certainly since the institution of Obamacare and the health marketplace, we know we have strategic partners where that's what they do. And they have impartial conversations to help people find the vehicles that are best for them. So we're thrilled that we were able to institute that and bring that to scale. I hope I'm answering your question. I'm going to get a lot of anecdotes around that, the how we've done it. But I think the larger issue is why it's important to do. We cannot do it all by ourselves. So looking for these complementary fits and opportunities to leverage work, I think strengthens the work really on both ends.
Yeah, I don't know that I can say much that's too different, but I think it really comes down to sort of mission and people. I mean, we have, as Mike said, we have common goals in that the Federal Reserve or the New York Fed and what my team does, like we want to increase economic literacy, and a big part of that is financial literacy. We're also making people aware that, the Fed is tasked with maximum employment and keeping prices stable, and we're public service, right? So we are an institution for the people and DYCD is too, right? I mean, so I think there's sort of that philosophical alignment. There are pieces where we said, oh yeah, this is a really good content, natural fit for bringing folks together. It's also the people you work with each time. I mean, you can probably tell, I like Mike a lot, very selfishly, right? And his team, right? I mean, there's this cross dedication that we have to do as much good as possible for the economic well-being and to improve outcomes across different communities. And I think any organization, if you're starting from that common thread, you can find a way. And it doesn't always, the other thing I would say is it doesn't always have to be such an in-depth ongoing partnership. We started with one event, right? Like one workshop, and then built from there and said, oh, this works. Well, what about this? And what about this type of program? And, I think sometimes it feels like if you have to boil the ocean from the start, it can feel like too much. And so I would say find common ground with that organization and just do one thing. I always try to break it down for students. If you feel like you can't learn it all, learn one thing and go ahead from there. See what works.
Yeah.
I think that's great advice. And I've had to temper my zeal at times about wanting to boil the whole ocean all at once. But I think you're right. And our example is a great and practical one about just getting started, doing something and seeing how it goes. And then no surprise, seeing that it went well and then increasing scale. Like, let's do that thing again. Okay, that went well again. Let's routinize doing that. All right, let's look at doing something else. Like things grow. As things grow and are sustained, we can continue to look at other ways to leverage those relationships. I can think about two things. Like, one, when you were talking about internship, I do want to let your listeners know, along with the Summer Youth Employment Program, we do have other youth workforce programs, wage programs, and some of my colleagues had done some pilot work with the Fed as well. Similar fashion, right? I think what we've been able to do in the past several years is institutionalize that relate. We don't have to have an MOU in place, but the people you mentioned, Heather, like, we know, all right, every quarter, Heather's going to call someone from my team, or someone from my team is going to call someone from Heather's team, and we're going to keep the band going, as they say. So there's that. And then there's new work that we've piloted. There's some contracts we're looking forward to entering into starting in July, economic development at the neighborhood level. And as we were fashioning that work as part of our stakeholder engagement, we reached out to the Fed. It's like, well, now you actually understand some of how we work. And we're considering working in some new ways. Can you help us think through how best to do that? How ought we go about this procurement? As I want to acknowledge the Fed as a great thinking partner, understanding what the underlying mission of the agency was and understanding where we're trying to go with those programs and help incubate and develop micro businesses that might become small businesses, larger, than they were when they walked in.
Yeah, thank you. This has just been such an interesting conversation, and I appreciate you highlighting what does financial education initiatives look outside of the school system? Like, what does it look like to leverage community partnerships, to do financial education in sort of I want to say a non-traditional way, outside of the classroom maybe. And I just appreciate you all sharing more about those initiatives and what the process was like. And you touched on things like scaling. I just think this was really helpful to our listeners. So I just want to round out with one last question for either or both of you, which is, are there any financial education initiatives or economic education initiatives, Heather, that are particularly promising to you? Is there anything you're really excited about? And Mike, it's totally okay to hype something from your own office. So I just want to end on this last question.
Some of what I'm always excited about, and this is hyping one of our own programs. It's actually a little bit different because it is more school-based, but I think it comes back to thinking about how to inspire young people, right? Whether they're in school, out of school, how to inspire them to feel part of the larger financial system, part of the larger economy, and learn more about it. I think a lot of us feel like some of these outside conditions, you hear about things on the news and it feels like it's just happening to you. But the fact is, we're all active participants. Every time we go to a store, we're participating in the economy. All this to say that one program that we run that I really would love for people to be aware of is the High School Fed Challenge. That is sort of potentially a little bit more local in terms of eligibility for high schools to compete. But what we're doing, and I think this is really relevant, is we're asking student teams to write about an economic theme and submit some written work. And this year, it's a podcast script.
Oh.
And then we review submissions and we select some of the written work, and then the New York Fed will publish some of the work. Not every paper we receive, unfortunately, but we publish it in something we call the Journal of Future Economists. So the goal there is really to get students thinking about an economic theme and communicating about it to their peers and sort of advancing this credibility, right? That if you're hearing your own peer group talk about something, that it helps you understand why it's important. That's one thing I want to highlight. And then the other is connect with us. Like a lot of the things that we do with Mike and DYCD, we have workshops and class visits that we can offer virtually in these times where someone from the New York Fed is speaking directly with a community group or a class. And the more we can put sort of a friendly face to economics and to financial literacy, that helps us all, right? We're all in this together. We're all part of the economy. And so the more that people can participate and have an active role, that's just better for all of us.
Definitely. Mike?
I like everything that Heather just said. And what you reminded me of is, and I guess this is, in a way, is trumpeting our programs. Again, the philosophy of helping people increase their own self-sufficiency. And the importance of not thinking of that as some sort of a binary, like we're stable and those people are unstable. And so we're going to flip this switch. And then, no, we're all, if you adopt a strength-based perspective, we all have assets. We know people who have aspects of their lives that are working well. And so if we access through various means, like, how's that working over there? Do I want to get to work on how this could work better for me in my own life? And that, to some extent, we all have messy lives too. Right? The pandemic has really helped expose this or increase our awareness of this, right? So, but the opportunity for us any of us to strengthen our self-sufficiency, some of that is through coaching or different kinds of, modalities to do it. And you can think of different life domains that get at that. So I think the approach that we have in mind is very much in sync with several things that Heather has said. Know about important things that are happening around you and how you can access those things. We do that in our, I'll put it this way. As I say, we do it in our youth work. We do it across the board. So I would say when we think about social services and we think about youth, if you close your eyes for a second and think about youth, what probably coming to mind could be things like the potential that young people have and how they have their futures. Like, well, you know what? Adults still have potential as well and have the rest of their lives ahead of them.
I certainly hope so. Yes.
I'm like, I don't consider myself done just yet with my life either. Right. So, if we tap into our own strengths and we think about ways to pay forward once we've learned certain things or if we've achieved certain things, and there's some nuance here. That's fine. There's some gradation here, but then there's levels qualitatively, right? So our own financial literacy and well-being and education, our own relationship fluency and education. There's so many ways that you can get at that. Just going back to kind of your initial question about avoiding just strict mandates. I think the important things are to engage and to look at practical ways to engage. And along with that tenet I mentioned before about maximum feasible participation, the community that we want to serve has voice in that. We also try to look a lot at our outputs and our outcomes. What has resulted from the interventions that we've set in place? And if it's not working, it's all right to change it. It's not a condemnation. I'm failing to think of the other term. It doesn't undermine having undertaken some effort. If as a result of your review, you realize it's time to rejigger it. It would be worse to just keep going without diagnosing or discerning what is or isn't working. It's all right to regroup and refashion, So I think those things will serve us well and contribute to the direction that I think we're trying to go.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Mike and Heather. And before we close out, I also wanted to give you all a chance to share with our listeners where they can follow along with each of your organizations. Heather, where can folks listen to learn more about the Federal Reserve Banks of New York's initiatives and activities?
Yeah, so if you visit NYFed, that's NYFED.org/econed, ECON-ED. In addition to learning more about our programs, we have a lot of different classroom and community resources that can be downloaded or print copies can be ordered. So please do take a look.
Perfect. Thank you. And Mike, where can people follow along with your department?
Thank you. For the New York City Department of Youth and Community Development, please look for us at NYC Youth. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, as was mentioned. And our agency website, you can go to www.nyc.gov/DYCD. And particularly for any New Yorkers who are listening, if you go to our website, there's the locator app, Discover DYCD. We've tried to make it very easy for you to look up whatever you may be looking for, by neighborhood, by zip code, types of services, whatever. We want to make all the services that we are funding known and available because they're there to support you, and your listeners in and outside of New York. Please follow us on social media. There's lots of great information, and we also, repost and share other people's great information. So we would love for you to continue to follow what we're doing. The barbershop talks, which are mentioned, again, those are archived. Go to NYC Youth on YouTube and you'll find them as well as a lot of other great content.
Wonderful. Thank you both for such a great episode. It was a real pleasure speaking with you all today. I just really appreciate you all sharing your expertise and your insight and giving us a glimpse into this partnership, which has produced a lot of great initiatives. So with that said, that's all for this episode of Focus on FinEd.
Thanks, Raven, and a special thank you to Heather and Mike for your insights as well as everyone listening. Stay tuned for our next episode where we dig into effective financial education and how legislative funding should be allocated. If you are interested in learning more about any of our policy convenings, you can find the written summaries on NEFE.org under Initiatives. Have a great day.
Focus on FinEd, the Policy Convenings, is produced by the National Endowment for Financial Education, a 501c3 nonprofit that is the independent, centralizing voice, providing leadership, research, and collaboration to advance financial education and financial well-being. The opinions and statements made on this podcast are those of the podcast participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of NEFE or constitute statements supported by NEFE. Links to our event summaries and any other documents discussed in this session are available in the show notes. For more information, visit www.nefe.org.